Welcome to the first webcast in our series on how GitHub uses GitHub. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about how we communicate using issues and pull requests in GitHub. My name is Cynthia Rich. I'm the manager of training here at GitHub, and I've been with the organization now for about 2.5 years, working with a team of very talented trainers who are located all over the United States, and in fact, all over the world. So over the next few minutes, I'm hoping to share with you a little bit about what I've learned, but also I want to share with you what we tell our new hires when they come on board. So this is really a class that we give to the individuals who are just joining our organization so that they can learn how to communicate more effectively within the organization. A few logistics. If you have additional questions after this webcast, please feel free to reach out to us via email at services@github.com. With that, let's go ahead and jump in and talk about our goals. Now, this class, as you probably saw in the class description, this is actually similar to a class that we give to all of our new hires. So the folks who join us, who come to GitHub and work with us, everyone gets a version of this course. And the interesting thing is that this course is given to both technical contributors and non-technical contributors. So everybody at GitHub actually does use GitHub in mostly the same way. So we all use GitHub to communicate, we all use GitHub to collaborate on our projects, and we all use GitHub to store the artifacts of our work. So some of the things that are important to us and how we pattern our communication and how we create these communication processes that work is really being thoughtful about how we organize specific aspects of our instance. So organizing people and projects. How do we organize issues and pull requests? How do we optimize our written communication? And last but not least, how can we provide visual structure to support our ideas? So these are the main goals that we want to cover in today's session, starting, of course, with how we organize people and projects. So first things first, we probably need to talk a little bit about how we communicate. So when we communicate at GitHub, we of course use issues, and we of course use pull requests, and we of course have in-person meetings just like you do. We also use Zoom as a tool for video conferencing. Over 60% of our workforce is remote, so Zoom is a really important tool in how we can connect with each other and have conversations. And then of course we have Slack, like many of you, and we also have a little internal app that we use called Team. It's kind of like an internal version of Facebook. It's a place where we can post our ships, let people know what we've been working on, if we have an exciting community project coming up that maybe we need some help with. All of those types of requests go in Team. But as you can see, this is probably pretty similar to the stack of communication that you use. But there's probably one really notable exception here. There's one thing that's missing from my slide that is a little bit of a shocker, at least to us when we come to work at GitHub, and that is that you don't see email here. So it is very rare for me to send an email. I can count on one hand the number of emails I send a month, and usually it's to folks who are outside of GitHub, and I literally don't have any other way to communicate with them. So within GitHub, we really try to encapsulate all of our conversation, all of the discussions that we're having about our projects. We try to make sure those all happen on the platform itself. And then in addition to that, we use the platform for team conversations. We actually have a repository that we go to that says, hey, I'm going to be on vacation this week, so our team members know. So we literally do use GitHub for everything communication related and send very, very few emails. And I think that'll become apparent as we go through this session of how we organize our work based on that. So let's talk about how we organize people. First of all, I think it's important to understand how we think about teams. So you can see here, this is an example. We have 688 people and 829 teams. So yes, you are reading that correctly. We actually have more teams than we have people. And the reason for that is we organize teams to make groups of people easily accessible across the organization. So we have I kind of went through our teams and I said, if I had to lump these into types of teams, here are the types of teams we have. We have these organizational teams, which are really just a reproduction of your org chart almost. So it's basically just services team, which is the team that I work on. And then within the services team, we have some sub teams here: engineering, tools, training, and operations. And of course, those would very closely map to our organization chart. So those are the easy ones. Those make sense. Then from there, we have some other teams. We have project teams. Now, project teams are meant to be formed and destroyed. So the idea is that I would form a project team around a specific cross-functional project that I'm working on. That makes sure that everybody who's involved in that project is being mentioned as a part of that project. And then when the project is over, that team is disbanded. And when I say the team is disbanded, I just mean we deprecate the team in GitHub so that people don't keep pinging that team unnecessarily. And then there are also affinity teams. So affinity teams for us are people like our Black-to-Cats. So these are folks who they share some commonality, and that commonality might cause them to be collectively called into an issue or a discussion. So the affinity teams are self-forming a lot of cases. So usually folks will get together and they'll say, I want to form an affinity team. Some of them were formed based on employee resource groups. So it was just a way for us to help those folks find others within the organization who identified in the same way. And so the affinity teams are also, you can request permission to join those. So if you identify with any of those teams, it's really easy to join those. And the last one down here is location teams. And I'm sure you can imagine this makes a lot of sense if I need to send a message to everyone in EMEA, for example, or I need to send everyone a message in North Carolina, which is where I'm from. So this would be an example where I can say, hey, at GitHub/North-Carolina, there's a conference coming up in North Carolina. Is anyone available to attend? So that would be an example of how we could use these location teams. But these teams are used within GitHub very liberally for @mentions. So generally, you'll join a team based on a specific interest or project that you're working on. And then you'll bring your team into those conversations as you see related ideas. So that's a little bit about how we think about teams. I think one of the really important things to also explain as a part of this is that it's all under one organization. So a lot of you who are using GitHub Enterprise, one of the questions that we always get is, how many organizations should I have? Well, all of GitHub falls under one GitHub organization with some really small exceptions. And those small exceptions would be the large open source communities that we actively support, such as Atom is one example. There's a new desktop community. So those are separate communities where we bring in outside collaborators who are working on these open source projects with us, but everything else that's under this GitHub umbrella really falls under this same organization. And the reason we do that is because it gives us this ability to @mention across these projects and to bring different teams into the conversation. All right. So I mentioned @mentions, and of course the @mentions that I was just talking about were the group @mentions. So that would be me typing @GitHub/ and then one of those group names. But we actually @mention very liberally at GitHub. In fact, most of our messages and discussions, whether it's in an issue or a pull request, have a few @mentions of specific individuals. And the reason that we do that is because filtering our emails at GitHub is literally an art form. There are actually applications that a lot of our team members use that help them to do some of this filtering and manage their notifications in more effective ways. But we find that filtering emails is really to be on that pedestal with art there. And we will typically filter based on direct mentions versus team mentions. So I'll have one inbox that says, these are just the direct mentions you got. Another one will just tell me the team mentions that I've got. I may even then break that down by the repository where they came in. Is it a primary repository? So in other words, one of the repositories where I am primarily responsible for work that's happening in that repository, or is it a secondary repository, which is basically everything else in the GitHub organization that I probably don't have direct responsibility for, but there's a chance somebody will mention me, try to bring me into a conversation, and of course I'll want to see that in my @mentions. All right, and the last point here, we unsubscribe. So just like we mention liberally, we also unsubscribe liberally. So you probably all have seen the option at this point where I can watch issues on GitHub, or I can watch repositories on GitHub. And of course, when I watch a repository, I'm going to receive an email notification about every single thing happening in that repository, which could mean a lot of email. depending on how busy the repository is. So we're pretty liberal at clicking that unsubscribe button in issues and pull requests if we feel that that discussion isn't going to need our eyes. So we'll unsubscribe from the discussion, which is another reason that if I specifically want to call a member of my team into a conversation, I'll always @mention them because I don't know if they've subscribed or unsubscribed from that particular conversation. So if I want their eyes on something, then I know I need to pull them back into the conversation with a quick @mention. So those are just a few of our thoughts around how we do the @mentions, but we do a ton of @mentions. It's actually really strange to enter a comment on an issue or a pull request that doesn't have at least one @mention in it. That's how much we literally @mention each other. All right, so that was a little bit about how we organize people into teams within our organization of GitHub. So from there, let's talk a little bit about how we organize our projects. Now, there's a few key ingredients of a project, and this really gets into some of these ideas of applying these open source principles inside of our organization. And so you've all heard the term, hopefully by this point, of inner source. If you haven't, you're going to hear a lot more of it as we go through this series of how GitHub uses GitHub, because the idea here is that we want people to be able to make drive-by contributions to our project. And when we say drive-by contributions, somebody should be able to quickly jump into our project, see what it's about, see how they could use it, see how they can contribute to that project, and see the direction that we're headed with our project. And so some of the key ingredients in any project that we have, these first three, the README, the contributing, and the roadmap, are really designed for those folks who are stopping by and want to see what our project is about. So our README would, of course, contain a list of what is this project about, what is its purpose, who are the members of the project team, and then more importantly, how do you consume this project? So is this a project that's a library for something else? Is this project primarily documentation around processes? Is this project a website that is being put out there to show folks the features of our new desktop application? I mean, what is this project? All of that should be in the README. The contributing guide is really a way for us to show people how they can contribute to the project. And it goes beyond just like, here's what we need folks to contribute, but it's also what are our processes around contributing? How do we want you to format your contribution? Are there specific style guides that you need to follow? All of that information should be in your contributing, so it makes it as easy as possible for someone who wants to stop by and contribute to your repository to understand what they need to provide for you in order to have their contribution accepted. And if you've ever contributed in open source, you'll know that's probably one of the scariest things about open source is I'm going to do all of this work, I'm going to submit the project back, and nobody's going to accept it. Well, of course, we want to create a culture inside of GitHub where these contributions are welcome, they're invited, and they can be merged. And so therefore, we want to make sure our contributing guides show people how they can get to that point. And then the roadmap, probably more self-explanatory, is just the idea of here's the vision that we see for this project. Sometimes the roadmap is literally this project is no longer maintained, but most of the time the roadmap is, this is where we see ourselves going for the next few iterations of the project and how we'll continue to improve it. These last two down here, issue templates and pull request templates, are a way for us to give people some sort of a framework when they start to create an issue or a pull request. So if there are things that I always expect them to include in their pull request, for example, show me screenshots of your feature in action, show me the tests that you ran, so show me something in your pull request. Anything that I expect them to give me, and this is usually tightly linked with that contributing guide, but anything I expect them to give me when they create their pull request should be in that pull request template. And then as soon as they hit that button for new issue or new pull request, that template is, of course, fed into the repository. The other thing that we like about projects at GitHub is if you've looked at the project feature on github.com, you've probably noticed that the project boards are super flexible. There are no restraints or no guidelines for this is what you should have in your project. So I went around and I poked around in a few project boards on GitHub projects, and I just said, let's take a look at what the columns are. Like, what types of things are they tracking? And so it was interesting. I opened 4 different projects and I literally found 4 different sets of columns. And that's just because we encourage the teams to set up these project boards based on what makes sense for them, based on what makes sense for the cadence of their work, how they're organizing their work, how they're working together to ship things. Is really important that you have the opportunity to have those conversations as a team so that these project boards can really meet that need. Because at the end of the day, if the project board isn't useful, no one will use it. And we learned that early on, right? If we create a resource and it's not useful to people, or it doesn't help people to guide their work, it doesn't help me understand when I come in at the beginning of the day what I should be working on next, then I'm not going to go to that thing. I'm not going to go to that resource anymore. And so that's the point of the project boards, is to structure those in a way that really makes sense for your team. So we've talked about projects, we've talked about the organization as a whole. Let's now talk about issues and pull requests specifically. So this is the meat of it. So when we organize our issues and pull requests, there are a few features that we use. You've probably seen these issues or these features when you created a new issue or a pull request. These are on the right-hand side over there. So there's that assignees option. So we're going to get into the text of the issue and pull request in just a minute, because that's probably the bulk of the presentation. This is just kind of some icing on top here, where we can talk about the features that GitHub gives us to organize these issues and make them easier for us to use. So with assignees, an assignee in GitHub is a really lightweight operation. It doesn't denote any special privilege. It doesn't denote any special blocking. So you're not blocking somebody from doing something just because they're not the assignee. But the idea is that the assignees are used to indicate who's responsible for the next step. And every time we change the assignee, that's documented in the body of the issue or pull request. So I can see right away when someone has, you can see here that I removed my own assignment and then I assigned Beard of EDU, who's one of my colleagues on the team. And we would use that to indicate as something moves through the process, right? So Beard of EDU typically does a lot of the writing. So when we're ready for the content writing or editing to happen, then we would assign it to Beard of EDU, who would then take it from there. Every discussion, and this is kind of the important thing about assignees, is every discussion in every repository should have an assignee, someone who's responsible for moving that forward. If you can't look at a discussion and assign and give it an assignee, then it might be time to evaluate whether that discussion should be active or whether it should be backlogged. So every discussion should have an assignee. We will go through every now and then and look at our list of all of the issues in our repository and just quickly go down through the list and look for ones that don't have anybody assigned and make sure that someone's assigned, or we close out those issues. The side benefit of using assignees is that I can, as a worker on GitHub, I can go up here to this pull request in this top black bar here. So I can find all of the pull requests, filter only by those that are assigned to me, and then it'll show me a list of everything that's been assigned to me. And that's a really helpful way for me to get eyes on the things that are most important first thing in the morning. So when I pop in first thing in the morning, I can see here are the things that are assigned to me. Which of those things can I move forward? Which of those things can I not move forward and I need to leave some sort of a comment on? So this is a great way to organize and kind of stay focused on the things that are important. And of course, you can also just do that. You can do the hand-typed filters there the same way. So this is another reason we use assignees, because it helps us to organize kind of the who's up next. Labels are another thing that's meant to be flexible. So we always want to add labels to our issues and pull requests. Those labels are also, by the way, shown on the project board. So when I add a label to an issue or a pull request, that will show up on the project board as well. So it's a helpful way to organize things across those different communication mediums. Labels are really meant to be customized for your project. So you can see it's easy to create a new label. I can edit an existing label. I can delete a label. So if you don't like the generic labels that GitHub creates for you whenever it creates a repository, you can just go in and delete those generic labels and create your own that are perfect for your team. So we've talked so far about all of the pieces that surround issues and pull requests. And these are all features that we use to organize our work, to communicate more effectively with each other, to let folks know who's responsible for what and who's involved in what. But at the end of the day, we can't communicate effectively in issues and pull requests without a really strong focus on the words that we write. And I think this is really from every experience that I've had at other organizations coming into GitHub. I've been here 2.5 years now, and I can tell you that I'm still in awe every single day of our team's ability to communicate effectively and supportively and inclusively. And I think that's really a hallmark of what it means to be a GitHubber. We write a lot. We write a ton. As you can imagine, if we're using issues and pull requests as our primary means of communication, we're doing a lot of writing. So we really try to focus on making sure that that writing is inclusive. And these are things that I feel like are a part of our DNA. They're a part of what we hire for. They're a part of our values. So these are really important to us is focusing on inclusive communication. And when we say focusing on inclusive communication, we mean inclusive in almost every definition of the word. So we mean inclusive in terms of I'm not biasing towards any group or away from any group. I am being inclusive in that I'm asking for others' opinions, I'm asking for feedback, I'm welcoming that feedback. So inclusive communication really means that we want feedback from every corner of the organization in our discussions. I mentioned we rely heavily on async communication. That's because we believe on writing things down. One GitHubber early on in my tenure wrote a blog post and it says, if you believe in something, put a URL on it. And I think that's really important, is that everything that we write, there should be a way I can get back to that conversation. There should be a way I can search. There should be a way, you know what, I know that Hector, one of the members of my team, I know that he wrote a really great comment about a specific problem that we're having. I'm seeing that problem crop up again. I should be able to go and reference that comment. I want to go back and pull in those great words again because I can't say it better. So that's why we always say if communication is worth having, we should put a URL on it. And then, of course, we believe in crafting communication for our future selves. So when we craft communication, whether it's an issue or a pull request, we believe that we're crafting that communication so that someone down the line can look back and understand why we made the decisions that we did. And I'll give you a great example. So one example that we made is in our training kit repository, which is our open source training materials that we provide for folks to fork and customize for their very own. In that repository, we decided that we were going to make a fairly significant change and we were going to switch from what were more slide-based formats to a different, more tutorial, hands-on format. All of that conversation, the reason why we did that, the thoughts that went into the changes that we made, all of that is documented in an issue. And so all of that conversation is available for the future when somebody wants to go back and say, why did we make that decision? Why did we go in this direction? What was it before? And what were the challenges we were having before? How many times have you had to have that conversation of, why did we change that? Like, oh, well, we came from this other thing, which also wasn't really working for us. And so let's not try that again. Instead, let's go in a different direction if we're looking to fix something. So we do write a lot, and that's why we write a lot. So if you've ever opened an issue, and I'm sure all of you have at this point, this is probably the most intimidating screen in GitHub to me, is this new issues just glaring back at me, because I realize every time I get to this screen, I'm about to craft communication that is going to be consumed by approximately 130 people. So those are all the folks who are watching this repository who are going to receive an email notification as soon as I create this new issue. I mean, I didn't mean to put more pressure on you, but the idea is that issues are important and the content that we write there is important. And a few things that we always want to ask ourselves as we're starting to write our new issues is, number one, what are we trying to accomplish? I mean, why are we even opening this issue? And this is kind of communication 101, right? You've learned this stuff, you've heard this stuff before. But what are we trying to accomplish? Who am I trying to reach? Clearly, I'm going to write this differently based on audience. So I'm going to write this differently. If this communication is within my team and we know that we've had several conversations about this already, then maybe I'm going to write slightly different than I would if I'm trying to pull in collaborators from maybe the support team and I need them to come help me. Then of course I might need to create more context and create more information so that they can feel like they can contribute. So who are you trying to reach? And what action do you want taken? And I think of these three, this last one is super important, and it's the one that most often gets left off when we're not careful about how we communicate. At the end of the day, if I stop by and I look at your issue and I don't know immediately what you want from me, I'm probably going to move on to something different and start working somewhere else rather than immediately providing what you're asking. Because I don't know what you want, I'm going to move on to something else, and chances are I may not come back. And that's a reality that we faced time and time again, and one that we try to consciously ensure doesn't happen when we're communicating internally. Because clearly, if I created this issue or I created this pull request, I want some action to happen as a result of that. And whether I'm implementing a feature, whether I'm trying to get feedback on a feature that we want to issue, maybe I need a bug fixed, whatever that action is, make sure that's really clear when you write your issue. And a few other things to consider. And these are those things that are just kind of embedded in a culture and you don't even really realize it until you've experienced it for a little while. But a few other things to consider. Always, always, always think about your end reader. How are they going to perceive what you've written? And I say that because one of the things that we always say when you're working with asynchronous conversations with remote teams who are literally all over the world, one of the easiest things to lose is positive intent. It's remembering that when one of my colleagues types a message on a comment or on an issue that I opened, that he typed that message with good intent, that his intent was positive and he was trying to be helpful. So it's understanding that perception is a two-way street. Perception is both my attempt to write in an inclusive way to ensure that my writing is positive and supportive, and perception is also on the side of the reader, you want that reader to assume positive intent. So a reader's not going to assume positive intent if my language is inflammatory, if my language is derogatory, if my language is condescending, right? All of those things are going to throw positive intent out the window. And so we're careful about the communication that we create for exactly those reasons, because we want to make sure that we can maintain this perception, this positive intent across all of our communications. Another thing that we always try to consider with regards to the reader is the reader's investment. And this comes back to the idea of if someone stops by our issue and they don't know how they can immediately contribute, they're just going to move on and do something else. So we're huge fans of drive-by contributions. If I @mention you in an issue, you should be able to read just that comment where I @mentioned you and know immediately what you need to do in order to support me. You shouldn't have to read back through 80 comments that have already happened on this issue prior to this point, but instead you should be able to hone in just on that comment that I made for you and @mentioned you and provide the necessary information. That's an art, is really thinking about and making sure that your reader can contribute in 2 minutes or less. The other thing to consider is we're going to invest the time to write this once, but 130 people plus are going to read this. And so if we're not careful, if we're not, we get too wordy, we include a lot of extraneous details, the information that we include isn't relevant or somehow takes us down a rabbit hole, right? All of these things are an abuse of the investment our readers are making in us. So we want to make sure that we're making the most of their investment. And I'm going to show you a couple of the ways that we do that in just a second. But the last point to consider with regards to our reader is we want our reader to always feel supported. And by this, I always mean when I'm responding to someone else's issue. So I always want somebody else, if they've asked me a direct question and I've responded thoroughly, I've cross-linked to things that are relevant in the conversation, I want them to know that I support them and that I'm here to help them. And so these are just a few of the thoughts that go through our heads when we communicate via issues. There's a few useful techniques here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. You can actually look at these online. So if you Google Bluff, Racy, or SciPab, some of you have probably already heard of one or more of these techniques. But these are just some communication techniques that we have shared with our teammates. I mentioned that this is used in new hire orientation. So these are just a few of the techniques that we've shared with teammates over the years. Bluff, which is basically just an acronym for bottom line up front. So in other words, just make sure that the stuff that's at the beginning of the issue helps people to dive in right away and know whether they can contribute or not. TLDR, almost every issue or pull request I write has a TLDR at the top of it. This is just a way for me to give an executive summary at the top. It's pretty similar to Bluff in that it is I usually use it at the beginning of a long post, and it's just a 1 or 2 sentence summary to help people gauge the level of investment that they're going to put into reading all of the rest of that issue. Racy, I'm sure most of you have heard of this. Responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. These are just the roles that individuals have in a project. And so the idea is you always want to make sure that you have someone responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, and you've thought about who those individuals are for each of these discussions. And then SciPab. This one's a longer one. Again, I'll let you Google this if you want some more information on it. But this was one that was brought to my attention more recently, and it's pretty interesting. There's some great resources on the site. But it's basically just another way of framing the conversation so that folks understand exactly what's happening and what's needed. And I thought I'd show you an example of one. This is a fairly recent example from one of our colleagues on the training team, Brianna Marie. And Brianna Marie was doing some research and realized that sometimes when you add emoji in text, they're not accessible by screen readers. So we decided we wanted to dig into this a little bit more and understand the impact it was having, because we use emojis interspersed with text in our courses. So you can see that Brianna opened this issue here. And when she opened the issue, she put the TLDR up front. And I didn't tell her I was going to use this as an example. So this is just something she did naturally. But you can see that she put the TLDR up front. And then she continued by giving some additional detail. So right away, you can tell from that very first sentence, do I want to dive into the rest of this or not? Do I feel like I have something to contribute? Am I visually impaired? Have I worked on projects before where we focused on ensuring that folks who are visually impaired could access our project? Or is this just something I'm really, really interested in? As an individual, I really want to know more about how we can make our products better for visual impairments, and so I want to help research this. So if I fall into any of those buckets, then I'm going to see this TLDR and I'm just going to keep reading because I know that this is a topic that I'm really interested in. You can see, of course, she also assigned it to herself and she gave it a label to note that it was a bug. So this is a great example of how we communicate in issues to try to make sure that it's very clear for folks who are stopping by. And of course, I didn't screenshot the whole issue, but at the end of the issue, there was a beautiful to-do list to let folks know what would be next. So we've talked about the issues themselves and kind of the spirit of the communication. Now let's talk about how we can format that communication so that it's accessible and easy for others. So Markdown is, of course, the simple, lightweight markup language that we use across GitHub in issues and pull requests. We also use it, you noticed earlier when I said readme.md, issuetemplate.md. So we also render Markdown nicely on our file view. So if you've created a .md or Markdown document, that will render nicely on GitHub as well. So a few of our favorite Markdown features, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, but I will send you a link to this presentation as well as this will be in the video. So a few of our favorites, we love cross-references and links. So I mentioned before that when I'm creating a new discussion, that I try to go back and I would find those amazing words that Hector wrote. Or maybe I know that we've had this discussion before and I can go link to that issue. Or maybe I want more information about a specific, maybe I've done some research and I found a specific website that I think is really helpful. I can link all of these things inside of our issues. And the more of this cross-linking we can do, the more we help our colleagues gather a rich context into the problem that we're trying to solve, the methods that we're trying to use to solve it so they can immediately feel like they can contribute. So these are just a few methods that we have here of creating cross-references. I tried to show you kind of a before and an after. You can have the same effect, but simply as you write your issue, just clicking that preview button. It kind of hides over there. It's amazing that some folks don't see it, which is fine. So check out number 3, which would be the same thing as creating a cross-link. As you can see over here, that's going to create a cross-link to issue number 3 or pull request number 3, whichever one it is. I can make that a little prettier by giving some context. I actually really love this approach because when I say check out this discussion, I might add some more information in here about check out this discussion where we decided we would go with approach A. And then the end result of that is listed there for them, but if they want to dig in and see more context or more information, then they could click that cross link. And then similar to that, here's a link where we're saying we previously mentioned that we should add a test. We mentioned that back over in number 3, and here's a great example, Write Good, which is just a regular old HTML link. So all of these are ways that we can add context for folks and help them see more information about the topic. Tables are a great way to provide visual structure in our issue and pull request. So this is one example. When we do our travel expenses for conferences, we'll actually put those in a table, just a simple markdown table so that we can see as a team, here's what we spent on this particular conference. So if somebody wants to go next year, we have a good idea of what the budget would be. So that's another example. Markdown tables are well documented. There's actually even sites that you can go to and you can create a table and then it'll convert that to a markdown table for you. Really basic formatting stuff, headers, bold text, italicized text, all of these things are actually up here for you in this markdown toolbar. And the thing that I love about the markdown toolbar is it doesn't obfuscate the actual text. So I can see when I click on this drop down here for a header 1, it's going to plug in a hash mark for me so I can see what a header 1 is. All right, quoting text. This is just a way to pull in parts from earlier in the conversation. So you know how it is, somebody makes a comment and then 6 people have commented before you have a chance to respond. So you might want to specifically call out the text that you're responding to. So you can do that with the quotes here and then provide your response. Images, of course, you can put images in. I will tell you that with images, drag and drop is your friend. So absolutely just drag and drop the issue in or the image into the body of the issue where you would ordinarily be typing. GitHub handles all the rest. Another interesting side note is if you wanted to embed an issue in a markdown document, for example, that's only going to be rendered on github.com, you can do the same thing. You can drag and drop that image into the issue text and then grab this URL here and insert that anywhere Markdown will be rendered. So I could use this image now in a README, for example. Code blocks. There's a single code block and then a fenced code block that's much longer. So both of those are options. Task lists, we love task lists. We use these a lot to denote next steps. And as you can see, just this simple syntax creates this nice little list of checkboxes for us. And the cool thing about this is that if you do this in the first comment on an issue, and then you go look at the list of all of the issues, you'll see a little status bar there. So if I went out there right now, I'd see a status bar that said 0 of 3 items complete. So I can quickly see how many of the boxes still need to be checked in my particular issue. And then you can also create just some simple drop downs here. These can be used if you are, again, there's a ton of text that somebody might want to read, or you might want to go into really long detail, but you want to make that detail optional. Then you can use a drop down for that, which is just a nice way to be respectful of your readers and understand that some people are not going to want to dive as deep as others. There are markdown guides. This is one that can be found on guides.github.com and will allow you to see how you can use this to see more markdown formatting than what I just showed. So those were just some of the ones that we use most often. And then just a couple more helpful tips, and then we were going to move over to questions. So if you have questions, please do drop those in the Q&A panel. But one of the things that we do, reactions are kind of big for us. And one of the reasons reactions are big is because, to be quite honest, they don't send a notification. So they're a great way for us to respond to an issue without spamming everyone who's watching this particular issue with another email. So I can quickly do, and this is just one way that we use reactions. So we use this when we're planning get-togethers where we're going to do a hack house, and we say which location do we want to go to, and we might assign each location a different emoji. But then we just do the little reaction votes down here, and you can see which one I voted for because it's highlighted in blue, which is kind of a nice feature. Another thing that we like to do is we like to kind of give some indication of the scope of the ship. And this is not really a markdown tip as much as this is just a general communication tip. So we try to say, this is a really small ship. So I think as long as one other person has looked at this and sees that it's working correctly, I think we can go ahead and ship it. So I say I can ship this with 1+1, and then we know that just one other member of the team needs to look at it, and once they've done that, I'll go ahead and merge it. So it's just a quick way to indicate how many reviewers we need. And then last but not least, the one thing that we haven't talked about a whole lot is Hubot. Hubot is our life and betterment bot, and you may have heard of Hubot before, or he may be new to you, but he essentially sits in Slack and does all kinds of helpful things for us. And one of the really helpful things that he does for us is when we mention a specific issue or a comment in an issue or pull request in Slack, then GitHub creates a little cross-reference for us. So he drops a note in our issue body. And so I can see here, this came from an issue and says Hubot commented because this particular issue was mentioned in this Slack room. And here's the link that I can go directly back to that context and see what the conversation was about. So this is so helpful in that Hubot helps us bring these two worlds together. The world of Slack, where we may be asking a ton of questions, or we may be having a conversation that helps us decide in a direction, and then he brings that back into the issue for us so that, again, that context is available to us long term, and we can see exactly why those decisions were made. So I want to jump to Q&A. Before I do, I know some folks don't stick around for Q&A, which is okay. You don't have to. I know that some of you may not have questions, but if you're not sticking around, just know this is the first of a series of 5. So this How GitHub Uses GitHub. Today our focus was really on how we communicate with issues and pull requests. Next time we're really going to focus on how we deal with remote teams, because as I mentioned, 60% of our organization is remote. So I'm going to grab another manager and we're just going to talk a little bit with you about how we communicate effectively with remote teams, how we manage those remote teams. On September 26th, we're going to talk just more generally about how we manage teams, talk about some of the tools that we use for that. On October 24th, we're going to focus on how we manage projects. And on November 28th, we're going to focus on writing documentation for your projects. And by the way, I'm going to pull in my colleague, Beard of EDU. You'll have an opportunity to hear from him on that one. You can sign up for any of these at services.github.com. And we hope to see you at one or all of these in the future. So with that, I'm going to jump in over here and let's take a look at questions. So there's a great question here. What is the lifetime of an issue in GitHub? For instance, when our team works on a major new feature, it may include lots of rounds of design. The issue can get very long, even before development begins. Would it be best to use an issue just for design and then a new issue for development? Yes. So a couple of ways that we've approached this in the past. We will either use a project board, and that project board ties together all of those issues for us. So if that new feature requires, multiple phases, input from multiple teams in those different phases, we'll often create a project board where each of the cards in that project board are related to those issues that then we need to track the project across. You can also use milestones for this. So you can use a milestone to collect a series of issues. And then the other thing I would mention is that we do cross-link pretty regularly. So If I had a first issue where perhaps we're having a conversation about we want to create a new feature. We decide, yes, we want to create the new feature. That then is going to spawn two new issues, one for design maybe, and then maybe one is for development, or maybe one is for pricing. Who knows what the three are, but there could be all of these different issues that are different conversations that need to happen about this feature. So I would then cross-link all of those issues back to that original parent issue, and I would also create cross-links in those individual issues. That's a lot of work, remembering to go back and cross-link everything everywhere. A lot of times it's just a lot easier to go ahead and combine them in a project board. So hopefully that helps with that one. But as far as length of an issue and what's a reasonable time frame for an issue, I'll be honest, if an issue's getting up into the 30s, 40s of comments, nobody's reading all of that context. You're much better off to summarize what was said in those first few comments, summarize it in a new issue, cross-link between the two, and close down the original. Because, to your point, it can get really long as you go through the different phases of the feature, and really overwhelming to kind of suss out what is it that I need to be working on right now. The example for creating the dropdown is not in the Mastering Markdown guide, but it is going to be in this webcast. So yeah, that's an extra bonus that's not in that guide right now, but feel free to grab it out of this webcast link for the slides, and we'll send that as part of the emails. And I'll show you actually while I'm answering questions. Let me just scroll back to that screen so you can see it. There it is. So Alan, hopefully that answers yours. Okay. For inner source, how do we start implementing in a huge organization? It's more of a mindset for people to open up for suggestions and improve themselves. And it's a bit difficult to convince the teams on this. Any suggestions? You're right. This is a huge, huge thing. And we have this conversation a lot. And really it is about, it's a cultural change at the end of the day. You're really having to build trust across organizations. I know a lot of folks have come from very siloed, they're in a very siloed structure, and now they're trying to broaden that and to make it much more collaborative across those silos, maybe even breaking down the silos altogether and creating cross-functional teams. And that really becomes, to your point, I think you hit the nail on the head right there, is it's very difficult sometimes for people to open up to this because they're really opening their heart and soul. Like, this is the heart and soul of my work. And there's all of these things that come into that, right? Imposter syndrome is a huge thing. Like, what if somebody outside of my team sees my work and thinks that I'm doing it wrong, or thinks that I'm, not as good of a programmer? There's a lot of insecurity to deal with there. And it really comes down to trust. And I think that's the thing for me that really helped me get over all of those feelings when I came to work at GitHub is, number one, the kindness. The fact that when people commented in issues and pull requests, they were always very kind, even when they were correcting me or showing me that I could be doing it a different way. And that really has to be cultural, and it has to be a conversation that you have with people when they don't respond in that way. So that's a really great question. We're actually going to cover that a lot more in the Managing Your Teams session. So if you're not signed up for that one, please do sign up for that one, because that's where we're going to really drill down into how do we fix some of those pieces and make this viable. Do you use another project tractor like Jira or Trello, or are all of these things done with GitHub? For the most part, projects at GitHub use GitHub projects. I will say there are some amazing integrations though. ZenHub is one example. There are a few different project tracking apps that integrate with GitHub beautifully, and I encourage you to check those out on the marketplace. Okay, let's see here. How does reviewing work? So we didn't cover reviewing at all in this. Reviewing for the pull request is more about the code side. We're going to cover that more again in Managing Your Teams. So, but the idea with reviewing is you can assign a reviewer, and you can say, these are the people that I want to review this. And then based on how many of those folks have completed their review, go ahead and merge. You have the ability also with protected branches to enforce that policy. So you can say we always want to have 2 reviewers, and so, or you can say we always have to have at least 1 review, that needs to be approved before we can merge. So you have some controls over those. But again, that's all a lot of that stuff's going to be covered in Managing Your Teams. With all those notifications and mentions, how do you deal with them after vacation? Have you ever drank from a fire hose? Yeah, so that's a really great question. Usually, to be honest with you, what we come back and do is we come back to our teams and we hop on Slack and we say, hey, team, coming back, reading through emails, wondering if there's anything you need immediate eyes on. And that's a good way for the team to let us know, hey, of all of those emails sitting in your inbox, these are the ones that have priority. But again, it comes back to the filtering. So I know that there are certain issues and pull requests that I'm responsible for moving forward. And so I've set filters so that my app mentions on those particular issues and pull requests filter to the top of my list, and I can see those more quickly. So yes, you're right. We do try to read through all of them, but I will tell you that probably most people are more after vacation. They're really worried about the ones where they're specifically app mentioned, but they might let some of those team mentions go. Okay, let's see here. I have a team. We're using Jira. Can you tell us if it's possible to only use GitHub to manage our projects instead of having the full Jira software create sprints, for example? So Jira is pretty powerful. I've seen Jira. I've worked with Jira just a little bit, not a ton. So I'm not going to claim to be an expert on Jira, but I know it's very powerful, and some of the things that it can do to help organize timelines and all of those pieces are really, really great. I've also found it's very overwhelming for me. So I think that for me, just being able to come in and immediately see where I can apply value has been great, to not have all of that just overwhelming, all those overwhelming tracking pieces. We successfully manage our projects all day long without anything that heavy. Usually what we say is, try it on a small project. Try it on one ship. Turn on issues in your repository. Try it just for one feature that you want to send out, and see how the project works for you. You don't have to ditch Jira eventually. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. I can try it on a very small basis, maybe refine the process on a couple of features, and then decide whether it's something we want to move forward with. And we've done that on a ton of different features where we've wanted to implement something new. All right, so external tracking tools like Jira work as effectively with GitHub as GitHub's internal issues tool. Jira does have a nice integration. So I think there are a lot of great ways that you can integrate back and forth with Jira. Most people who are using Jira just turn off issues in GitHub, and they'll use Jira as their primary ticketing and work allocation system. Specific contents on InnerSource, which you can present to your teams. Send me that question, if you would, please, in email form. So I'm looking at Birjesh. If you'd send me that question via email, just so I can have your email address, and I'm happy to send you some more resources. Is there any plan to add colors or modify the font to project cards? Projects are active feature. They're actively under development. I don't know off the top of my head what's next, but I know that there are a lot of plans to make them easier to use. Let's see here. How much of GitHub issues are handled by the individuals and project teams, and how much does the project need a specific individual to manage and keep issues moving? That is a great question, and I think it depends by team. It depends on really by the size of the team. I think small teams, it's practical for every member of the team to jump in and help with this. I think for larger teams, it becomes a little bit more unwieldy or a little bit harder because you can get to the point where you have so many people contributing to the project at once that I spend all of my time trying to keep up to speed on what's happening, or at least filter out what I don't need to pay attention to. So I think at some point on larger teams, it becomes a need to have someone whose primary responsibility, or at least maybe not primary responsibility, but they are the person who owns that, of keeping it cleaned up, keeping things moving forward, and so on. But we kind of trade that off on our team, and it works really well. Do project and team mentions actually get sent to all of the team members or to managers and then later propagate to team members? So it depends on how the team is set up. So the way ours are set up is that the team itself is every member of that team. So for example, I think I mentioned Project Lily Spider, and let's just say that's a new feature where we're going to add colors to our project cards, since somebody gave us that idea a minute ago. And so I would have on that team probably a couple of designers designers. I would probably have some testers on that team. I would probably have some developers on that team. So everyone who is in that team collectively would receive those mentions every single time. However, if your organization has set up a structure where maybe you have to ping a manager team first and then the manager decides what everybody else is pinged on, I think that could be accomplished. It feels like a lot of heavy lifting for the manager. We are going to share this presentation. There's both going to be a recording of this as well as I'll give you links to the presentation itself. And I feel like I missed one. Okay, I just started working on a remote team, and I'm not sure how small talk is received or if it is welcome, as in talking to other team members of a remote team about things that don't specifically pertain to the project. Okay, that's a really great question. How do we approach small talk at GitHub? We have a lot of small talk. I think small talk is a really important element of belonging. I think it's hard as a team to feel cohesiveness or to feel like you're a part of a team or to feel like you've bonded with a team if you don't have just a little bit of small talk. And I'm not saying that you should sit in Slack all day and never talk about work. But I do think it's important that you have some flexibility in your conversations and you can bring up a great book. And I know, a couple people on our team love Bob's Burgers, right? So every time a new Bob's Burger episodes comes out, we have a short conversation about Bob's Burgers, but it doesn't last all day. It's usually, 3 or 4 back and forth on Slack, and then we move back to work. And I think it's important, like I said, for all of those reasons, you need to be able to bond. You need to have commonality with your team members. So I think small talk, if you think about it, if you were working face to face with each other, you'd have these conversations at the water cooler. But on a remote team, you don't have a water cooler, and you need one. I think it's important to the effectiveness of a team. Okay, let's see. How do you handle internal questions that require immediate clarifications? Do you jump on a quick call or just type priority of the question in the issue in progress? That's a great question. We don't hesitate if we feel like we are. If we feel like we have a conversation that needs to happen right now, we'll jump on a Zoom call real quick and have a conversation. Our team is 100% remote. None of us work in the same place. So if something needs immediate clarification, or if we feel like we're having a conversation in an issue and maybe we're just talking around each other, because it happens with written communication. And so there are times where we'll say, this would just be a whole lot easier if we could jump on a Zoom call and have a conversation. And we're not shy about doing that. All right, perfect. Thanks for all of the amazing questions. I'm really excited by these. I don't see any new questions, but I'll hang out here for just a couple minutes just to see if any more come in. Also, a huge thank you to Hector and Matt, who both popped in and helped me kind of wrangle a Q&A for a little while there, make sure that some of the questions could be surfaced. Do you document the calls later on? Yes, always. That's a great question. So we believe that any team meetings that we have, we should typically have again, put a URL on it, right? So usually if we're jumping on those calls and having a conversation, then we're probably going to make some decisions about a path forward, and that should absolutely be documented for the rest of the team to see. So yes, we always do document those calls later on. And we'll put them right in the same issue. So we'll usually just say, hey, Hector and I jumped on a Zoom to talk about this. Here's what we think as far as path forward. Yeah, terrific. Hopefully I'll see a couple of you saying, see you on the August 22nd. So thanks, I'll see you there. Do you think a smaller team, say 15 to 20 people, could use the project methods you mentioned successfully? A project is spun up and down and only contains specific members key to that feature. Yes, I do think so. I think that that is the sweet spot, probably, is for these small to medium-sized teams of folks that are using projects. I think when you get into huge teams, that's where you probably need something like Jira or something a little bit more fully featured to manage all of those moving pieces. But I think for a small to medium team, then the projects feature can be really powerful. And we are going to have there is a webinar that focuses just on projects. So please do pop into that one and check that one out. An awesome use of emoji. I only wish GoToMeeting used it, but I know what you're saying, so thank you, Chris. All right. Please do follow up by email. The email address, let me see if I can just jump back to a specific slide here. The email address is here. So if you have any questions for us and you want to contact us via email, please feel free to reach out to us at services@github.com. My username is crichid. So if you want to mention me in there, I'll be happy to answer your question, but really any member of the team will be happy to help you and to answer any questions you have. All right. Well, with that, I think I'll go ahead and close out the webinar. Thank you again, everyone who joined, and for the great questions, and hopefully we will see you all. Let me put that calendar back up here. We will see you all on August 22nd. Thanks so much.